The air in the 50th floor boardroom was worth more than the oxygen on the street, but it was suffocating. At the head of the polished mahogany table sat Brennan Ashford, heir to a billion-dollar tech empire, and beside him his mistress Katrina Monroe, her hand resting possessively on his. They were there to carve up a king's fortune. Across from them, the family lawyer looked on with a stony expression as Brennan spoke his words dripping with venom for his absent pregnant wife. He was painting her as a villain, a gold digger, a woman about to be written out of history. But history, like a loaded gun, was waiting just outside the door. And the woman he was destroying was about to walk in and pull the trigger. The law offices of Cole and Associates occupied the 3 highest floors of the One Vanderbilt Tower, a steel and glass needle piercing the Manhattan skyline. The view from the main conference room was a god's-eye panorama of the city, but no one was looking at it. All eyes were on the man at the head of the table, Brennan Ashford. He had the kind of casual, expensive confidence that came from a lifetime of never hearing the word no. His suit was Tom Ford, his watch a Patek Philippe, and his grief, it seemed, was entirely custom-made for the occasion. His father, Walter Ashford, the titan behind Ashford Innovations, had been buried 2 days ago. Today was the reading of the will, the formal transfer of power, and Brennan was acting less like a grieving son and more like a king ascending his throne. To his right sat his younger sister, Phoebe Ashford, a woman whose life was a curated collection of charity luncheons and equestrian events. Phoebe seemed perpetually lost, her wide, anxious eyes darting between her brother and the lawyer. She clutched a small, jewel-encrusted handbag like a life raft. To Brennan's left, however, was the real focal point of the room's tension. Katrina Monroe. She was stunning in a severe, sculptural way that contrasted sharply with Brennan's wife. Dressed in a form-fitting black dress that was just a shade too provocative for a somber legal meeting, she projected an aura of triumphant ownership. Her perfectly manicured hand, adorned with a canary diamond that was certainly not from Brennan's wife, rested on his forearm. She was a declaration of war made flesh. At the other end of the long table, Mr. Lawrence Cole Walter Ashford's lawyer for 40 years adjusted his glasses. He was a man made of tweed leather-bound books and quiet disappointment. He had watched Brennan grow from a spoiled boy into a man who wore his father's legacy like a costume, and his expression was one of profound professional neutrality that failed to mask a deep personal weariness. "If we're all present," Mr. Cole began, his voice a dry rustle of paper, "we can proceed. The will of Walter Henry Ashford is quite direct." "Let's get on with it, Lawrence," Brennan said, a dismissive wave of his hand. "We all know what it says. Dad knew who built this company with him, who was ready to take it into the future." He squeezed Katrina's hand pointedly. "And who wasn't?" The jab was aimed squarely at his wife, Gracie Davies. The official story, the one Brennan had been spinning for the last 6 months, was that their marriage had tragically crumbled under the weight of his father's illness. That Gracie, cold and calculating, had shown her true colors when the family needed unity the most. The tabloids, fed by anonymous sources that sounded suspiciously like Brennan's publicist, had hinted at her greed, her emotional distance, her unsuitability as the matriarch of the Ashford dynasty. "Where is Gracie Brennan?" Phoebe whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Shouldn't she be here? She's still your wife. And she's, you know." She gestured vaguely towards her own stomach. Brennan's jaw tightened. Gracie was informed of the time and place. If she chooses not to attend, that is her decision. Frankly, it's for the best. This is a day for family, for those who genuinely cared for my father. He looked at Katrina, his eyes softening with a look of manufactured devotion. Katrina was a great comfort to my father in his final months, a better friend to him than his own daughter-in-law ever was. Katrina offered a small, sad smile to the room. Walter was a wonderful man. I miss him terribly. I'm just here to support Brennan. Her voice was soft, melodic, and utterly false. She had met Walter Ashford twice, both times at tense charity galas, where the old man had looked right through her. Mr. Cole cleared his throat, a sound like gravel grinding. The will makes a specific provision for Gracie Ashford, formerly Davies. Her presence is requested but not under the initial articles legally required for the primary reading. He deliberately avoided looking at Katrina. Shall I begin? Brennan nodded, leaning back in his chair with the smug satisfaction of a man who had already won. He looked at Katrina, a silent promise passing between them. The empire was his. The money was his. And soon, the woman beside him would be his wife, and the inconvenient one carrying his child would be a footnote, a payoff, a distant and unpleasant memory. The vultures were perched, knives and forks were in hand, and the feast was about to be served. They had no idea they were the ones on the menu. Mr. Cole broke the seal on a thick cream-colored envelope with a quiet crackle that seemed to echo in the silent room. He unfolded the document, the dense legal text, a fortress protecting Walter Ashford's final commands. I, Walter Henry Ashford, he began, his voice taking on the formal cadence of legal scripture, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils. Brennan steepled his fingers, a portrait of impatient authority. Katrina sat unnaturally still, her painted-on mask of serene support starting to feel tight around the edges. Only Phoebe fidgeted, twisting a diamond ring on her finger. To my beloved daughter, Phoebe Ashford. Mr. Cole read, I bequeath a trust fund in the amount of $50 million to be managed by the Ashford Estate Executor. This trust will provide for your lifetime, ensuring your comfort and security. I also leave you my collection of impressionist art and the summer home in the Hamptons. May it bring you the peace you have always sought. Phoebe let out a shaky breath, a mixture of relief and sorrow. It was a generous, almost dismissive sum, enough to keep her in designer clothes and charity galas for the rest of her life. But it kept her far from the levers of real power. It was a gilded cage, and she was, as always, its willing occupant. Oh, she whispered. That's very kind of Daddy. Brennan gave her a patronizing smile. He always took care of you, Phoebes. The subtext was clear. Now for the important part. Mr. Cole continued, his eyes scanning the page. To my various household and corporate staff, there are a series of smaller bequests and pensions detailed in Appendix A in gratitude for their years of loyal service. He paused, taking a slow sip of water. The tension in the room ratcheted up a notch. This was it. Regarding my wife, Gracie Davies Ashford, Mr. Cole said, and Brennan sat bolt upright. Katrina's hand, which had been resting on his, tightened its grip. Given the recent difficulties in her marriage to my son, I bequeath to her the sum of $10 million, conditional upon the signing of a non-disclosure agreement regarding her time with the Ashford family. This sum is to be considered a final settlement. A wave of triumph washed over Brennan's face. It was perfect, more than enough to look generous, but a pittance compared to the full inheritance. It painted Gracie as a problem being paid off, a nuisance being silenced. He shot a smug look at Katrina, who allowed herself a tiny, victorious smile. $10 million to disappear forever. A bargain. And now, Mr. Cole said, turning to the final, most crucial page. The remainder of my estate, including my controlling shares in Ashford Innovations, my personal properties, my liquid assets, and all subsidiary holdings I leave to my only son. He paused, and in that second of silence, Brennan Ashford felt the world solidify beneath his feet. He saw the future spooling out before him. Board meetings where he was the unquestioned authority, magazine covers hailing him as the new visionary of tech, and Katrina draped in diamonds on his arm. Brennan Michael Ashford, Mr. Cole concluded. He shall also assume the role of executor of my estate. This is my final wish. The words hung in the air, final and absolute. Brennan let out a long, slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He had done it. The old man had come through. All his fears that his father saw his recklessness, his affairs, his fundamental lack of seriousness were unfounded. He stood up his chair, scraping back harshly. He was the king now. "Thank you, Lawrence," he said, his voice thick with emotion he wasn't truly feeling. He turned to the small audience. My father was a great man, a hard man, but he was a builder, and he knew that to build a future, you sometimes have to tear down the past. He looked from Phoebe's tear-streaked face to Katrina's adoring one. He knew this company needed strong, decisive leadership. He knew it needed a vision untethered from hesitation. It was a speech he had rehearsed, a thinly veiled condemnation of his wife, Gracie. Everyone in their circle knew she had a brilliant strategic mind. She had an MBA from Stanford and had been a rising star at a consulting firm before she married him. In the early years, she had been his secret weapon, honing his presentations, refining his ideas. But her careful analytical approach had begun to feel like a criticism to Brennan's ego. He called it hesitation. His father had called it wisdom. "And I want to be clear about something," Brennan continued, his voice rising with newfound power. He took Katrina's hand and pulled her to her feet beside him. "Katrina has been my rock through all of this. She stood by me when others were distant." He stroked her cheek. "She understands the pressures I face, the vision I have. She is the future of this family, and I will not have her or her role in my life questioned by anyone." He was defending his mistress at the reading of his father's will. It was a brazen, shocking display of disrespect, not only to his marriage, but to his father's memory. Phoebe gasped softly. Mr. Cole's face was a granite mask betraying nothing. Katrina looked up at Brennan, her eyes shining. "Oh, Brennan," she whispered, playing her part to perfection. Brennan nodded resolute. "As my first act as executor, I want the paperwork for Gracie's settlement drawn up immediately. We'll have it couriered over. There's no need to drag this out." "That will not be necessary." The voice was quiet, calm, and clear. It came from the doorway, and it cut through the charged atmosphere of the room like a shard of ice. Every head swiveled towards the grand double doors of the boardroom. Standing there framed by the dark, polished wood was Gracie Davies Ashford. She was not the hysterical, weeping woman Brennan had described to his friends. She was not the defeated, broken creature he had imagined would come crawling for a settlement. She was a vision of unnerving composure. She was 7 months pregnant, the gentle swell of her belly prominent beneath a simple, elegant navy blue dress. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat chignon, and her face, though pale, was serene. Her eyes, a deep, intelligent grey, held no tears, only a profound and steady calm that was far more terrifying than any rage could have been. She looked like a queen who had come not to plead for her throne, but to reclaim it. In her hand, she held a single large manila envelope, sealed with a distinctive dark green wax stamp. For a moment, the room was utterly still, a tableau of shock. Phoebe's hand flew to her mouth. Katrina's triumphant smile dissolved her face, tightening with a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic. She instinctively took a step back from Brennan, as if proximity to him had suddenly become dangerous. Brennan was the first to recover his shock, curdling instantly into fury. "Gracie!" he snarled, his voice a low growl. "What the hell are you doing here? I told you this was for family only." "I am family, Brennan," she replied, her voice even and cool. "I am your wife, and I am the mother of your child, your father's grandchild." She took a step into the room, the doors clicking softly shut behind her. Her presence seemed to shrink the cavernous space, drawing all the energy and attention towards her. "We are in the middle of something important," Brennan snapped, gesturing around the room as if to prove his point. "You're late. We've already concluded the primary reading." "I'm not late," Gracie said, her gaze shifting from her husband to the lawyer at the end of the table. "I'm right on time. Hello, Mr. Cole." Lawrence Cole inclined his head, a flicker of something unreadable in his old eyes. "Gracie, we are glad you could make it." His tone was markedly more respectful than the one he had used with Brennan. Brennan scoffed a harsh, ugly sound. Glad she could make it. She's here to make a scene, to try and squeeze more money out of this. I should have known. He turned back to Gracie, his face a mask of contempt. "It's over, Jen. The will has been read. You get your 10 million. Now take your little payday and go. Don't embarrass yourself further." He gestured towards Katrina, a possessive and defiant act. "My life is with Katrina now. We're moving forward. You should do the same." Gracie's calm expression didn't waver. She didn't even glance at Katrina, a dismissal more profound than any insult. It was as if the other woman simply didn't exist. Instead, she walked gracefully towards the table, her steps measured and deliberate. She stopped beside an empty chair, the one that had clearly been set for her, and placed the manila envelope on the gleaming mahogany surface. The green wax seal seemed to go under the recessed lighting. "What is that?" Brennan demanded, suspicion lacing his voice. "This," Gracie said, her hand resting lightly on the envelope, "is what I came to deliver. It was entrusted to me by your father 2 weeks before he passed." A nervous energy rippled through the room. Phoebe stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. Brennan's bravado faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine uncertainty. "My father was sick, heavily medicated." "Anything he gave you is irrelevant," he blustered. "He was probably delirious. He wasn't in his right mind." "Oh, he was perfectly lucid, Brennan," Gracie said, her voice dropping a little, taking on a note of intimate memory that excluded everyone else. "He was tired, yes, but his mind was as sharp as ever. Sharper, perhaps. He saw things very, very clearly at the end." She pushed the envelope gently across the polished table until it stopped directly in front of Mr. Cole. "Walter asked me to bring this here today. He instructed me to wait until after the initial will was read. He said it was important for everyone to show their true colors first." Her grey eyes finally moved to her husband, and for the first time a sliver of ice-cold fire was visible within them. "And you, my dear husband, did not disappoint." Mr. Cole picked up the envelope, his long, papery fingers examining the seal. He looked at Brennan, then at Gracie. He knew that seal. It was Walter Ashford's private mark, the one he used for his most confidential and important correspondence. "What does it say, Lawrence?" Brennan demanded, his voice now a little too loud, a little too strained. "It's probably just some sentimental nonsense. A letter." "It does not feel like a letter," Mr. Cole said quietly, testing the weight and stiffness of the envelope. He looked at Gracie. "You are presenting this as a legal document to be entered into the proceedings. I am presenting it as Walter Ashford's final binding directive," Gracie corrected him gently. "He assured me it would clarify his intentions." The word clarify hung in the air, laden with unspoken threat. The gilded cage Brennan had just inherited suddenly felt fragile, its bars made not of gold, but of glass. And Gracie had just brought a hammer. The boardroom had become a pressure cooker. The air, once filled with Brennan's arrogant pronouncements, was now thick with a tense, humming silence. All the power, all the momentum, had shifted from the head of the table to the woman standing quietly by its side. Mr. Cole held the envelope, his expression a careful study in legal impassivity. He ran a thumb over the green wax seal embossed with the distinctive A of the Ashford family crest. "This is indeed Walter's private seal," he confirmed, his voice low and serious. The statement landed like a judge's gavel. It gave the document an immediate, unimpeachable authenticity. Brennan's face was a storm of conflicting emotions, rage, disbelief, and a creeping, snake-like fear. "This is absurd. A theatrical stunt. My father's will has been read. It's done. This is a desperate, last-ditch attempt to contest it by a woman who knows she's been cut out." He turned on Gracie, his voice rising. "What did you do? Jen? Did you bully a sick old man on his deathbed, whisper poison in his ear when he was too weak to fight back?" Gracie met his accusations without flinching. "Your father was many things, Brennan, but weak was never one of them. He knew exactly what he was doing. He also knew you." She let that last sentence hang in the air, a devastatingly simple indictment. "This is irregular," Brennan insisted, turning his appeal to the lawyer. "Lawrence, you can't possibly take this seriously. We proceed with the execution of the will as read. That is the proper legal procedure." "The proper legal procedure," Mr. Cole countered, his voice as sharp and precise as a scalpel, "is to examine any and all documents purported to be a final testament or codicil of the deceased, especially when presented under such circumstances. To ignore it would be a gross dereliction of my fiduciary duty." He picked up a slender silver letter opener from his desk set. "With the consent of the present parties, I will open this envelope." "I do not consent!" Brennan shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The sharp crack made Phoebe jump. Katrina flinched, her carefully constructed composure finally shattering, replaced by a look of naked greed and fear. Her dream was slipping through her fingers. "Your consent is not required, Brennan," Mr. Cole said flatly. "As the potential executor, you are a party of interest, and therefore cannot unilaterally obstruct the process. Gracie, as the presenter of the document, has given her implicit consent. Phoebe." Phoebe looked from her furious brother to her strangely serene sister-in-law, her face a mess of confusion. "I think we should see what Daddy wanted," she stammered. "Whatever it is." "Thank you, Phoebe," Mr. Cole said. He ignored Brennan's sputtering protests and slid the letter opener cleanly under the wax seal. The sound of tearing paper was offensively loud in the quiet room. Brennan was on his feet now, pacing behind his chair like a caged animal. "This is a farce. Whatever is in there is a forgery. Gracie has been planning this for months, ever since she knew I was leaving her." "Be quiet, Brennan," Gracie said, her voice still quiet, but now edged with steel. "For once in your life, listen." Mr. Cole carefully extracted 2 separate documents from the envelope. The first was a multi-page document bound by a blue legal ribbon, clearly a formal codicil. The second was thinner, a single folded sheet of Walter Ashford's personal heavyweight stationery. He unfolded the letter first. His eyes scanned the familiar, spiky handwriting of his old friend and client. He read it silently, his expression unreadable, but the longer he read, the deeper the lines on his forehead seemed to etch themselves. The silence stretched, becoming unbearable. "Well," Brennan demanded, "what is it?" "A love letter to his precious daughter-in-law." Mr. Cole looked up not at Brennan, but at Gracie. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod, a sign of confirmation passing between them. A silent acknowledgement that the plan Walter had set in motion was now officially underway. He then cleared his throat and addressed the room. "This is a letter from Walter," he announced. "It is dated 2 weeks ago. It is signed and his signature is verified by his personal physician, confirming he was of sound mind and not under duress. The letter serves as an explanatory note for the accompanying legal document." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "The legal document," he continued, picking up the ribbon-bound papers, "is a duly witnessed and notarized codicil to the last will and testament of Walter Henry Ashford." A collective gasp went through the room. A codicil. A legal amendment. The will they had just heard read was not the final word after all. Katrina sank back into her chair, her face ashen. The canary diamond on her finger suddenly looked garish and cheap. "A codicil," Brennan repeated, his voice hollow with disbelief. "What does it say?" Mr. Cole adjusted his glasses, his gaze cold and direct as it landed on Brennan. "It says, and I quote from Walter's accompanying letter, 'I have recently been forced to acknowledge a profound error in judgment regarding my son's character. An inheritance is not a prize to be won. It is a responsibility to be earned. A legacy is not a toy to be played with, but a trust to be honored." He then picked up the codicil itself. "This document fundamentally alters the disposition of the estate as previously outlined. It begins with the invocation of a new clause." He looked directly at Brennan, his eyes seeming to bore right through him. "It is entitled Article 7, the Morality and Fidelity Clause." The phrase "morality and fidelity clause" landed in the center of the room like a grenade. Brennan stared at Mr. Cole, his face slack with a dawning, horrified comprehension. "A what clause?" He stammered, the words catching in his throat. "A morality and fidelity clause." Mr. Cole repeated, his voice devoid of any emotion. He began to read directly from the codicil, the dense legalese a death knell for Brennan's ambitions. "This clause is hereby enacted as a primary condition for the inheritance of any and all controlling interests in Ashford Innovations and the associated liquid assets by my son, Brennan Michael Ashford. The inheritance is contingent upon his demonstrated commitment to the values of the Ashford family name, integrity, loyalty, and discretion." He paused, looking over his glasses at Brennan, who was now pale as a ghost. "It continues, should Brennan at the time of the reading of this will be engaged in any public or private scandal that brings dishonor to the family, or should he be found to have been demonstrably unfaithful to his marital vows to Gracie Davies Ashford, all bequests made to him in Article 6 of the primary will are rendered null and void." The room was so silent you could hear the faint hum of the building's ventilation system. Katrina made a small, strangled sound. This was about her. This was a direct, posthumous strike from the old man, aimed with surgical precision at her and Brennan's affair. "This is insane," Brennan finally exploded, finding his voice. "He can't do that. It's medieval. You can't disinherit someone for their personal life." "On the contrary," Mr. Cole stated calmly, not looking up from the page. "A testator can place almost any condition on an inheritance so long as it is not illegal or against public policy. And Walter was very thorough. He specifically cites the protection of the company's brand and shareholder value from the potential fallout of reckless personal behavior. It is perfectly legal and perfectly binding." Brennan whirled on Gracie, his eyes wild with accusation. You did this. You poisoned him against me." "I never said a word to him about Katrina," Gracie replied, her voice steady as a rock. "I didn't have to. Walter wasn't blind, Brennan. He was just quiet. He saw the way you looked at her at the last foundation gala. He saw the late-night credit card receipts from hotels I've never been to. He saw the articles your own publicist planted in the gossip columns to lay the groundwork for our divorce. He saw everything. The specificity of her knowledge hit Brennan like a physical blow. She had known. She had known all along and had said nothing, simply watching, waiting. "So what?" Brennan spat, trying to rally. "It's my word against hers." "How can you prove anything? There's no proof right here, right now." He looked around the room, a desperate, pleading look in his eyes. He was searching for a loophole, a way out. He had brought Katrina here himself. He had defended her, proclaimed her the future of his family, just minutes earlier. He had walked himself with his own breathtaking arrogance directly into his father's trap. "I believe," Mr. Cole said, his voice laced with an almost imperceptible touch of irony, "that your own impassioned speech a few moments ago, defending Ms. Monroe and declaring your intention to build a life with her in the presence of 3 witnesses, would be considered demonstrably unfaithful by any court in this state." Checkmate. The trap had sprung. But Walter Ashford was not finished. The clause was the sword, but the old man had forged a second, even more devastating weapon. Mr. Cole put down the codicil. "This clause effectively voids your inheritance of the company and the bulk of the estate, Brennan. The codicil dictates that in this event, the entire portion bequeathed to you would be placed into a charitable trust, the Walter Ashford Foundation for Ethical Innovation." For a second, it seemed that was the end of it. The company lost the money gone, all of it funneled into a charity. A complete and total disinheritance. Brennan looked crushed, but a part of him almost seemed relieved. If he couldn't have it, at least Gracie couldn't either. But then Mr. Cole picked up the manila envelope again. There was still a document inside. "However," the lawyer said, his voice dropping significantly, "there is a second document. This is not a part of the will. It is a separate, legally binding instrument." He slid out a sheaf of papers stapled together, and bearing the letterhead, not of his law firm, but of a private investment group. "What is that?" Phoebe whispered, her voice barely audible. This, Mr. Cole announced, is a private partnership and management transfer agreement for Ashford Innovations executed between Walter Ashford and Gracie Davies Ashford. The second bombshell was more powerful than the first. Brennan stared, his mouth agape. A partnership? What are you talking about? She never worked for the company. That's where you're wrong, Gracie said softly, speaking for the first time since the revelation. For the last 18 months, after you started losing interest in the actual work and became more interested in the lifestyle I've been meeting with your father. Secretly. She painted a picture that Brennan could barely comprehend. Late-night calls, weekend meetings at the city library. Walter, disillusioned with his son's lack of vision, had found a willing and brilliant apprentice in his daughter-in-law. He had recognized the strategic mind he had always wished his own son possessed. The Phoenix Project, that AI integration that saved the fourth quarter last year, Gracie said, her eyes locked on Brennan's. That was my proposal. The pivot to sustainable tech that landed the company on the cover of Wired Walter, and I drafted that plan on my kitchen table. He was mentoring me, Brennan. He was teaching me how to run his company, because he knew he couldn't trust it to you. Mr. Cole held up the final document. This agreement establishes a new controlling entity for Ashford Innovations. It bypasses the will entirely. Upon Walter's death, his 51% controlling stake in the company was not to be transferred to his estate, but was automatically sold for a nominal sum of $1 to this pre-established entity, an entity for which Gracie Davies Ashford is the sole director and majority shareholder. He let the words sink in. Brennan hadn't just been disinherited. He had been surgically removed. The company wasn't going to charity, it was going to Gracie. The document stipulates the shares are to be held in trust for her and for the natural-born heir of the Ashford lineage, her child, Mr. Cole concluded. Brennan, you are left with the Manhattan penthouse, which was in your name already, and a personal trust fund your grandfather set up for you years ago. It is a substantial amount by any normal standard, but you no longer have any connection to or control over Ashford Innovations. The empire was gone. The throne he had been so eager to claim had just vanished from beneath him, reappearing under the woman he had tried to cast aside. The true papers weren't just a will. They were a corporate coup executed from beyond the grave. And Gracie wasn't just the grieving widow. She was the new CEO. The silence that followed Mr. Cole's final pronouncement was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. For a long, drawn-out moment, Brennan Ashford simply stood there, his face a canvas of utter devastation. The confident, swaggering air had been hollowed out, leaving behind a bewildered, pathetic shell. The crown he had placed on his own head had shattered into a million pieces. Then the disbelief gave way to a primal, guttural rage. No! The roar was animalistic, echoing off the glass and polished wood of the boardroom. No, I don't accept this. This is a lie, a conspiracy. He lunged across the table, not at Gracie, but at the papers in Mr. Cole's hands. Let me see that, it's a forgery. She forged it. She tricked him. Mr. Cole, with the surprising quickness of an old man who has dealt with his share of tantrums, pulled the documents back, holding them protectively to his chest. Brennan, control yourself. These documents are ironclad. They have been authenticated. Walter's signature is on every page, witnessed by an independent counsel and 2 members of his board. Brennan's wild eyes darted around the room, looking for an ally for anyone who would validate his sense of cosmic injustice. He looked at his sister Phoebe, who was staring at Gracie with a new dawning expression of awe and confusion. No help there. His gaze finally landed on Katrina, the woman he had defended, the woman he had sacrificed an empire for. "Katrina," he pleaded, his voice cracking. Tell them how she manipulated him, how she was never there for him." But Katrina Monroe was a creature of calculated survival. She had hitched her wagon to a stallion and just discovered he was a gelding. The mask of the loving, supportive partner was gone, replaced by a shrewish, panicked fury. "You told me it was yours!" She shrieked, her voice high and sharp. She wasn't looking at Brennan with sympathy, but with the utter contempt of a predator whose prey has just dissolved into dust. "You swore to me. You said your father was an old fool who adored you. You promised me everything. I thought it was—" Brennan yelled back, gesturing helplessly. "He was my father. Some son you are." Katrina shot back, her carefully curated elegance completely gone. She pointed a shaking, red-nailed finger at him. "You lost it all. For what? For her." She turned her venom on Gracie. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Sitting there all smug with your belly." Gracie didn't rise to the bait. She simply looked at Katrina, a flicker of something almost like pity in her eyes. "This was never about you, Katrina. You were just a symptom of the problem, a predictable one." The casual, clinical dismissal was more infuriating to Katrina than any insult. "I loved him," she cried, a last desperate gamble at playing the victim. "You loved the idea of him," Gracie corrected her, her voice soft but firm. "You loved the Ashford name, the penthouses, the private jets. You never once asked him about his work, his passions, his fears. You just saw a prize, and you tried to claim it. I can't even be angry at you. It's just what you are." Defeated, exposed, and stripped of her leverage, Katrina grabbed her ridiculously expensive handbag from the floor. "This is a nightmare," she hissed primarily to herself. She shot one last, hate-filled glare at Brennan. "Don't you dare call me!" And with that, she turned and stormed out of the boardroom, her heels clicking an angry staccato on the marble floor of the hallway. The future Mrs. Ashford was gone, her dreams of a billion-dollar lifestyle evaporating with every step. Brennan watched her go, the final pillar of his deluded reality collapsing. He sank into his chair, a broken man, all the fight gone out of him. He stared at his hands on the table, the hands that were supposed to be running a global corporation, now empty. "Why?" he whispered, his question directed at Gracie. "Why would he do this to me? I was his son." For the first time, Gracie's composure softened, a genuine wave of sorrow washing over her features. She walked around the table and stood before her husband. "He did it because you are his son, Brennan," she said, her voice gentle. "He loved you, but he saw you were drowning in ego, in insecurity, in your desperate need to prove you weren't just Walter Ashford's son. He built that company from nothing. It was his life's work, his real child. He couldn't let you destroy it, and he knew you would have." She let out a heavy sigh. "He also did it for our child. He wanted his grandchild to be raised with the values he tried to instill in you: humility, hard work, integrity. He didn't want our baby to grow up in the shadow of your scandals. He did this to protect his legacy and to protect his family. Both of them." She placed a hand on her stomach. "He told me in one of our last conversations that giving you everything you wanted would have been the cruelest thing he could possibly do to you. So he gave you a chance instead, a chance to build something of your own, to become your own man without his shadow." The explanation was not one of vengeance, but of a harsh, painful love. It was a truth more devastating to Brennan than any simple disinheritance. His father hadn't done this out of hate, but out of a profound and utter lack of faith. Mr. Cole cleared his throat, bringing the raw emotional moment back to the business at hand. "Brennan, I think it would be best if you left now. We have a lot of paperwork to get through." He looked at Gracie. "Madam Chairman." The new title hung in the air. Brennan flinched as if he'd been struck. He looked at Gracie. Truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. He didn't see the woman he'd cheated on, but the woman his father had chosen. The true heir. Without another word, he stood up. A man suddenly aged a decade and walked out of the room, leaving his name, his legacy, and his future behind him. The slam of the boardroom door as Brennan departed seemed to suck all the remaining rage out of the room, leaving a vacuum in its wake. The silence that rushed in to fill it was unlike any Gracie had ever experienced. It wasn't empty. It was dense, heavy with the ghosts of shouted words, shattered egos, and the quiet, calculating ghost of Walter Ashford himself, whose final gambit had been a masterpiece of posthumous strategy. The air still held the faint, cloying scent of Katrina's expensive perfume, a cheap fragrance trying and failing to mask the stench of scorched earth greed. An empty water glass stood where Brennan had sat, a single drop of condensation, tracing a path down its side like a tear. For a long moment, the three remaining figures were a tableau of the New World Order. Mr. Cole, the steadfast executor, stood as a bridge between the past and the future. Gracie, the unexpected queen, was the focal point of all the room's energy, and Phoebe, the forgotten princess, was finally seeing the world outside her gilded cage. Phoebe was the first to move, her actions tentative, as if she feared the slightest motion might shatter the fragile new reality. She looked at Gracie, but it was a different kind of look than she had ever given her before. The usual polite, distant gaze of a society sister-in-law was gone, replaced by a raw, bewildered awe. It was the look of someone who had just witnessed a magic trick and was now trying to see the hidden mechanisms behind it. "You knew," Phoebe breathed the words, barely a whisper. It wasn't an accusation, but a statement of profound wonder. All this time, while Brennan was parading that woman around, while the papers were printing those awful veiled stories, you knew what was coming. Gracie turned from the door, her shoulders slumping, her just a fraction of an inch, the first sign of the immense strain she had been under. "I knew Brennan was being unfaithful," she corrected softly. "That part was painfully obvious, but I didn't know the full extent of your father's plan. Not until the end." She walked slowly, drawn by instinct, to the massive floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the sprawling urban kingdom of Manhattan. From 50 floors up, the ceaseless yellow cabs looked like blood cells moving through the city's arteries. A universe of commerce, ambition, and struggle played out below. Walter's universe, and now hers. He called me to his study about a week before he entered the hospital for the last time. She continued, her voice taking on a distant, reflective quality as she recalled the memory. The room had smelled of old leather lemon polish and the faint, sweet scent of the unlit cigars he kept in a humidor on his desk. He had looked so diminished against the grandeur of his high-backed chair, a lion in winter, his physical strength waning, but the fierce intelligence in his eyes burning brighter than ever. He told me, "A legacy, my dear girl, is like a garden. You can't just hand it to someone who only wants to pick the flowers. You must give it to the one who is willing to tend the soil." He said he'd spent years watching Brennan, and that he saw a man who would burn the garden down just to complain about the ashes. Gracie traced a line on the cool glass with her fingertip. "He apologized to me for Brennan, for the humiliation. He said he saw the daughter he never had in me, someone who understood that power wasn't a prize, but a profound responsibility. Then he showed me the documents. The codicil, the partnership agreement. He made me promise I would see it through. He said I had to wait to let Brennan walk into the trap himself. It was the only way it would be final. The only way the board would understand the necessity of it. She turned back to face Phoebe, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. It was the hardest promise I have ever had to make. To smile through family dinners while my heart was breaking to carry his grandchild, while his own son was trying to erase me, to listen to whispers and read gossip and remain silent. It felt like a betrayal every single day. But I owed your father. He saw me. He believed in me when my own husband looked right through me. Phoebe's carefully maintained composure finally crumbled. A sob escaped her lips, and she moved across the room, closing the distance between them. In a gesture that was completely out of character for the usually reserved and image-conscious woman, she wrapped her arms around Gracie in a hug that was both fierce and fragile. "I'm so sorry, Jen." She wept into her sister-in-law's shoulder. "I'm sorry I was so blind. I saw the way Brennan treated you, how he dismissed your ideas. I never stood up to him. No one ever did. I believed the stories because it was easier than confronting him." She pulled back her mascara-smudged eyes, finding Gracie's. "Daddy knew what he was doing. He always did. He put the family in the right hands." Her gaze dropped to Gracie's belly, and a watery, genuine smile broke through her tears. He put his future in the right hands. A real warm smile finally touched Gracie's lips, reaching her tired eyes. "Thank you, Phoebe. That means more than you know." And Cole, who had been quietly and discreetly arranging the documents into neat piles, finally spoke his practical tone, grounding the raw, emotional moment. "Phoebe is right, Gracie. Walter made the correct choice. But it will not be an easy one." He gestured to the papers on the table. "The board of directors is comprised of men who were loyal to your father, yes. But they are also conservative, old-school industrialists. They will see a 30-something woman, his son's estranged wife, no less taking over a billion-dollar legacy. They will be more than skeptical. Some will be hostile. You will have to prove yourself from the very first moment. Are you truly ready for the fight that comes next?" His question was not a challenge, but a final, necessary test. Was she ready for the weight of it all? Gracie took a deep, steadying breath. She looked from Phoebe's hopeful face to Mr. Cole's serious one. She looked at the documents on the table, the instruments of her liberation and her life's new purpose. Then she looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. It was more than a piece of furniture. It was a symbol, carved from dark walnut, upholstered in rich bottle-green leather, worn smooth by decades of Walter Ashford's presence. It was the seat of power. The throne. Brennan had seen it as a prize, a place to sit and be admired. Gracie saw it for what it was, a mantle. A heavy, lonely, and profoundly important responsibility. With a newfound grace and purpose, she walked to the head of the table. She didn't sit. Instead, she stood behind the chair, placing her hands on its solid, carved shoulders. She could feel the faint grain of the wood under her palms, a tangible link to the man who had entrusted her with his life's work. She was no longer just Gracie Davies, the brilliant consultant. She was no longer Gracie Ashford, the wronged wife. She was the guardian of a legacy, the architect of a future, the mother of the heir. She was everything Walter had needed her to be. "Yes, Mr. Cole," she said, and her voice was transformed. The quiet, gentle tone was gone, replaced by a clear, confident command that rang with an authority she hadn't known she possessed. "I am ready." Her eyes met his, and a silent understanding passed between them. The king was dead. A new era had begun. She gave the chair a final resolute touch, a silent promise to its former occupant. "Get the board on a conference call," she ordered, her voice crisp and decisive. "Inform them there has been a change in leadership. They have a new chairman to meet." She paused, a flicker of steel in her eyes. "And we have work to do." And so in the silent aftermath of a corporate earthquake, Gracie Ashford stood not as a victor gloating over the spoils of war, but as a leader stepping into the role she was always meant to have. This wasn't a story about revenge. It was a story about justice. It's a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about being the loudest voice in the room, but about having the patience, the intelligence, and the courage to play the long game. Walter Ashford didn't just leave his company to his daughter-in-law. He left it in the hands of the only person who truly understood its value and had the character to protect it for the next generation. A true legacy isn't what you leave for people. It's what you leave inside them. If this story of justice resonated with you, and if you believe that character is the ultimate inheritance, then let us know in the comments. Drop a Justice for Jen below to show your support. Don't forget to hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs to see the underdog win, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories where the truth always finds its light. Thank you for listening. The first thing you hear is the sound that becomes your entire world, the steady rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. It's a metronome counting down the seconds of a life suspended in limbo. For Eleanor Vance, lying paralyzed in an ICU bed, it was the only proof she still existed. But then two other sounds pierced the sterile fog voices. One was her husband, Richard, a voice that once promised forever. The other belonged to a younger woman. They weren't whispering words of comfort. They were laughing at her expense over her comatose body, planning a future built upon her grave. They thought she was a ghost already. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The world for Eleanor Vance had shrunk to the space between beeps. Beep. An inhale she couldn't control. Beep. An exhale she couldn't feel. Beep. The pulse in her own ears a faint drum against the symphony of machines that were living for her. She was floating in a thick grey abyss, a prisoner in the derelict vessel of her own body. A car accident, they'd told her, during a fleeting moment of lucidity. A truck had run a red light. That's all she remembered before the darkness swallowed her whole. Now the darkness had company. Look at her. Richie. A lilting saccharine voice whispered a sound as cloying as cheap perfume in the sterile antiseptic air of the ICU. She just lies there. It's creepy. That was Chloe Decker, Richard's protégé at Sterling Properties, a girl barely 25 with ambition that burned brighter than her bleached blonde hair. Eleanor had seen the way Chloe looked at her husband, a predatory gleam disguised as admiration. She had seen the way Richard's hand lingered on Chloe's back for a moment too long during company galas. She had known in the way a woman always knows, but had chosen the quiet dignity of denial. Richard's voice, a low baritone that once soothed her to sleep, was now laced with an impatient, cruel amusement. The doctors say it's a miracle she's alive at all. Significant brain trauma. They don't know if she'll ever wake up. Even if she does, she'll probably be a vegetable. More work for me." He sighed, a theatrical sound of a man burdened by a tragedy he was secretly celebrating. A wave of impotent rage, cold and sharp, washed over Eleanor. "Vegetable, I can hear you, you bastard. I can hear every treacherous word." But her lips wouldn't move. Her eyelids were leaden shutters. She was buried alive. Chloe made a soft, cooing sound. "Oh, you poor thing, having to deal with all this." And right before the Kensington Tower deal is about to close, there was a rustle of fabric, the squeak of a leather chair. He was sitting down. Chloe, she imagined, was perched on the arm of his chair, or maybe even his lap. The thought was a physical blow. Is everything, going to be okay with the financing? With her being like this? "Don't you worry your pretty little head about that." Richard chuckled. His voice was closer now, right beside her ear. She could smell his cologne, the expensive sandalwood scent she'd bought him for their anniversary. It smelled like betrayal. "Everything is in my name. Well, our names jointly. But as her husband, with her incapacitated, I have full control. Power of attorney. It's one of the perks of marriage, I suppose. I sign the money moves. The Kensington deal will make us legends, Chloe. And once she's gone, it will all be ours. Ours." The word was a dagger twisting in a wound she couldn't show. Her entire life with Richard flashed through her mind. She had been a brilliant corporate lawyer at Pierce & Lyle in Chicago, on the fast track to a senior partnership. Then she met Richard Sterling, a charming, ambitious real estate developer with dreams that stretched as high as the skyscrapers he wanted to build. He'd courted her with a relentless passion, convincing her that his dreams were their dreams. He'd told her he needed her mind, her legal acumen, not in an office tower downtown, but by his side, helping him build his empire. So she'd quit. She'd traded her corner office for a role as his unpaid advisor, his strategist, his wife. She had structured his deals, vetted his contracts, and built the legal framework for Sterling Properties, making it an impenetrable fortress. And she had done it all for love. For him. What if she doesn't die? Chloe's voice was a nervous whisper. What if she just stays like this forever? Hooked up to these horrible machines. There was a pause. The beeping of the monitor seemed to grow louder, filling the silence. Eleanor felt a cold dread snake its way through her paralysis. "Then we'll have to make a decision," Richard said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush that was more terrifying than any shout. "Dr. Peterson says it will eventually come down to quality of life. As her loving husband, I'll have to make the hard choice. To let her go peacefully. It's what she would have wanted." He stroked her hair. The touch was grotesque, a spider crawling on her skin. She wanted to scream, to recoil, to claw his hypocritical hands away from her. "You won't get the chance," a voice screamed inside her head. A part of her she thought had long been dormant. The sharp, analytical mind of Eleanor Vance, Esquire, began to stir. Chloe giggled a horrid, tinny sound. "You think of everything, Richie. You're so smart." She lowered her voice, thinking she was being discreet. "Is the nurse gone?" "I've missed you." The sound of a kiss, wet and obscene, echoed in the silent room. It was followed by Richard's smug murmur. "Patience, kitten. A few more days. We have to keep up appearances. The grieving husband. Once the deal is closed and the doctors give me the final nod, our new life begins. We'll buy that penthouse overlooking the park. We'll take the yacht to Monaco. Everything she has, everything we built, will be the foundation of our happiness. They continued to talk, their voices a venomous drone, outlining the future they were planning to build on her ashes. They mocked her taste in art, the charities she supported, even the way she organized the kitchen. Each word was a fresh insult, a new layer of humiliation. Eleanor absorbed it all. She let their cruelty soak into her, not as a poison, but as fuel. The grey fog in her mind began to recede, replaced by a crystalline, cold clarity. Richard thought he had full control. He thought her name on the accounts was a mere formality. He had always dismissed her legal structuring as Ellie's little hobby too complex for his big-picture mind. He had signed every document she put in front of him for 15 years, without reading a single clause, trusting her to protect his interests. He had never once considered that she was protecting her own. As they finally rose to leave, Richard leaned over her one last time. "Sleep well, darling," he whispered, his breath hot on her cheek. "Don't you worry about a thing. I'll take care of everything." He and Chloe walked out, their laughter echoing faintly down the hallway. The door clicked shut, leaving Eleanor alone again, with the steady, rhythmic beep. But now the sound was different. It was no longer a countdown to her end. It was the ticking of a clock. And Richard's time was running out. She just needed to wake up. 15 years earlier, the world was a canvas of boundless opportunity for Eleanor Vance and Richard Sterling. Their Chicago apartment, though, modest, buzzed with an electric energy filled with architectural blueprints, spread across the dining table, and legal pads covered in Eleanor's precise, elegant script. He was the dreamer. She was the architect, not of buildings, but of the very foundation they stood upon. Eleanor had just made junior partner at Pierce & Lyle. She was known for her unyielding diligence and an almost psychic ability to find loopholes and craft ironclad contracts. She loved the intellectual combat of corporate law, the thrill of outmaneuvering an opponent on the pages of a complex merger agreement. Then came Richard, a force of nature with a dazzling smile and a vision for reshaping the Chicago skyline. He saw in her not just a beautiful woman, but a strategic weapon. "Ellie, you're wasted there," he'd told her one night, gesturing passionately towards the city lights from their balcony. "You're making old men richer. With me, with us, we can build something that lasts, something with our name on it. I have the vision. You have the brains to make it bulletproof. We're a perfect team." His ambition was a drug, and she became willingly addicted. The decision to leave her firm was agonizing, a severing of an identity she had meticulously built. But looking at Richard, she saw a shared future so bright it blinded her to the sacrifices she was making. So she took the leap. Her first task was to structure their assets. Richard had a small inheritance and a great deal of debt. He was a brilliant salesman, but a reckless financial planner. He saw money as a tool for the present, not an asset to be protected for the future. Eleanor saw things differently. She saw risk everywhere. Market downturns, predatory partners' lawsuits, and the unpredictable frailties of human relationships. "We need to set up a holding company." "Richard," she explained one evening, sliding a diagram across the table. "A master trust. We'll call it E&R Sterling Holdings. Terms sont sent. All assets, all properties. Every share of stock will be owned by the trust, not by us as individuals. It's a shield. It protects our personal assets from any business liabilities." Richard had waved a dismissive hand, more interested in a new design for a cantilevered balcony. Sounds complicated. Just do whatever you think is best, legal eagle. That's why I have you. He'd winked, patted her on the head, as if she were a clever pet, and went back to his drawings. That condescension, though playful at the time, planted a tiny, cold seed of doubt in Eleanor's mind. It was the first inkling that he saw her contribution not as a partnership, but as a service. Still, she pushed the feeling aside and got to work. She created the E&R Sterling Holdings Trust with a labyrinth of clauses and subclauses that would make a tax attorney weep with admiration. It was a masterpiece of legal engineering. She was the settler, and they were co-trustees. As long as they were together and functioning, they had equal control. But Eleanor, ever the strategist, planned for every contingency. She embedded a series of triggers within the trust's charter tripwires that would shift the balance of power under specific extreme circumstances. She remembered the day she drafted the most critical one. It had been raining a gloomy Tuesday. Richard had just come home, buzzing about a potential investor, but he'd also been careless with his words, making a joke about a friend who'd been taken to the cleaners in a divorce. "You'd never do that to me, though, would you, Ellie?" He'd laughed. Of course not. She'd smiled back, her heart a little colder than it was a moment before. That night she drafted Clause 11, Section B. She called it the Incapacitation and Fiduciary Duty Clause. It was her secret fail-safe. The clause stipulated that in the event one trustee became medically incapacitated as certified by 2 attending physicians, the other trustee would assume sole unilateral control of all assets within the holding. This was standard, but Eleanor added a unique, vicious little twist. Her addendum subsection 2 stated that this transfer of power would be irrevocable if, during the period of incapacitation, the acting trustee was found to be engaging in actions that constituted a breach of fundamental fiduciary and marital duty. What defined such a breach? The clause was deliberately brilliantly vague, referencing actions demonstrating gross negligence, infidelity, or intent to cause financial or personal harm to the incapacitated party. Crucially, the activation of this subsection didn't require a court of law. It required only a formal attestation submitted by a legal representative of the incapacitated trustee, along with what the document termed credible supporting evidence. The evidence could be a recording, a sworn affidavit from a witness, or financial records. Upon submission to the trust's designated financial institutions, all control, all accounts, all properties, and all voting rights would be immediately and permanently transferred to a new secondary trust. This secondary trust was her true masterstroke. It was named the Vance Legacy Trust. She was the sole beneficiary and trustee. It was a ghost entity existing only on Napa, in a file in her personal safe, its charter lodged with the bank's most senior trust officer, a man who owed his career to a tip Eleanor had once given him. When she'd finished drafting it, her hands were trembling. It felt like a betrayal of the love she felt for Richard. It was a preemptive strike against a war she hoped would never come. "What's all this?" Richard had asked, picking up the thick document a week later, ready for his signature. "It's the final charter for the holding company," she'd said, her voice calm and even. "It's just standard boilerplate. Protects us from everything. I've put signatory flags on all the pages you need to sign." He'd hefted its weight. "God, you lawyers love your paperwork." He hadn't read a single word. He'd simply flipped through the pages, scrawling his bold, arrogant signature, Richard Sterling, wherever a yellow flag pointed. He was signing his own death warrant and applauding her for her thoroughness. Over the years, the E&R Sterling Holdings Trust grew into a behemoth. It held their penthouse on Lakeshore Drive, the vacation home in Aspen, a portfolio of stocks worth tens of millions, and most importantly, the controlling interest in sterling properties, the engine of their wealth. Richard. The face of the company grew more arrogant with each new building that clawed its way into the sky. He forgot that the real power wasn't in the steel and glass he erected, but in the paper and ink she had so carefully arranged. He saw the fortress and thought it was his. He never realized he was just a guest, and she was the one who held every key to every door. Lying in her ICU bed, the memory of that rainy Tuesday returned to her with perfect clarity. The condescending pat on the head, his careless signature on the page, his laughter. He had called her his legal eagle. He was about to find out just how sharp her talons were. Days bled into one another in a monotonous cycle of beeps, hushed medical jargon, and the sponge bath at dawn. For Eleanor, it was a period of intense, silent focus. While her body lay inert, her mind was a whirlwind of activity, rereading every line of the trust charter, planning her moves like a grand master, envisioning a chess game 20 steps ahead. The first and most critical step was communication. She had to reach him. She had to reach Benjamin Carter. Benjamin was more than her former law partner. He was the closest thing she had to a brother. They had started as ambitious associates at Pierce and Lyle together, spending late nights fueled by coffee and a shared passion for the elegant intricacies of the law. He was the only one who had truly understood what she was giving up to join Richard. "Just make sure you're fireproof, Elle," he had warned her, his expression serious. Men like Sterling. They build empires, but they burn a lot of bridges. Don't let yourself be one of them. He was the only other person on Earth who knew about the Vance Legacy Trust. He had been its legal witness. His signature was there right next to hers. Her daily visitor was a nurse named Maria. She was in her late 50s with kind eyes and hands that were gentle, yet efficient. Unlike the other staff who treated Eleanor like a piece of medical equipment, Maria spoke to her. She would recount stories about her grandchildren, comment on the weather, or read passages from a novel she was enjoying. She did it without any expectation of a response, a simple act of human connection. It was during one of Maria's visits that Eleanor felt it a twitch, a tiny infinitesimal flicker of a nerve in her right index finger. It was a spark in the void, a signal from a distant shore. She focused all her will, all her mental energy on that one finger. The effort was Herculean, like trying to lift a mountain. The muscles atrophied from disuse resisted. But her mind, honed by years of legal battles, was relentless. Move. Nothing. Move. A tremor. Maria was adjusting her IV drip, her back to Eleanor. "The doctor says your vitals are getting stronger, dear," she said cheerfully. "That's a good sign. We're all rooting for you." Eleanor ignored the words, focusing only on the signal from her brain to her hand. She pictured the nerve endings firing the electrical impulse traveling down her arm. The image of Richard and Chloe kissing in this very room flashed in her mind, and a surge of adrenaline, pure and potent, flooded her system. The finger twitched again, more noticeably this time. She waited until Maria turned back towards her. The nurse was checking the readout on the heart monitor. Now was the time. Eleanor poured every ounce of her being into the effort. Her finger curled just slightly, then straightened. It was a clumsy, spastic movement, but it was real. Maria's eyes widened. She slowly looked from the monitor to Eleanor's hand. She froze. "Did you..." Did you just do that?" she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Eleanor did it again. A curl, a twitch, tears welled in Maria's eyes. She rushed out of the room, her voice echoing down the hall. "Dr. Rossi. Get in here. Now." Dr. Isabella Rossi was a sharp, no-nonsense neurologist who had been overseeing Eleanor's case. She came in followed by Maria, her expression skeptical but hopeful. "What is it, Maria?" Her hand. She moved her finger. "I saw it," Maria insisted. Dr. Rossi came to the bedside and took Eleanor's hand. "Mrs. Sterling." "Eleanor. Can you hear me? If you can hear me, try to squeeze my hand." Eleanor focused. The doctor's hand felt warm, a tangible link to the world she was fighting to rejoin. She pictured Richard's smug face, heard his condescending whisper, "I'll take care of everything." The rage gave her strength. She squeezed. It was faint, a mere flutter of pressure, but it was undeniable. Dr. Rossi's professional demeanor melted away for a second, replaced by a genuine, brilliant smile. "Well, I'll be. Welcome back, Mrs. Sterling." Over the next 2 days, progress was slow but steady. Eleanor could now squeeze on command, and she had regained a small amount of movement in her eyelids. She could flutter them, not yet open them, but it was a start. It was communication. 1 squeeze for yes, 2 for no. They established a system. Richard's visits continued a grotesque pantomime of grief. He would hold her unresponsive hand, the same hand that was now plotting his ruin, and speak to her in sorrowful tones for the benefit of the nursing staff. "I'm right here, darling. Fighting for you," he'd say, before immediately turning his attention to his phone, barking orders about the Kensington deal. He had no idea the vegetable in the bed was watching his every move through barely parted eyelids. The moment she had been waiting for came on a Thursday afternoon. Richard was out meeting with investors. Dr. Rossi was making her rounds. Maria was by her side. "You're showing remarkable progress, Eleanor, Doctor," Rossi said, making notes on a chart. "We're seeing more activity in the frontal lobe. Your cognitive functions seem to be intact. It's just a matter of the brain re-establishing connections with the body." This was her chance. Using their established code, she began to flutter her eyelids insistently. Maria noticed first. "Doctor, she wants something." Dr. Rossi leaned in. "Eleanor, what is it?" 1 squeeze for yes, 2 for no. Are you in pain? 2 squeezes. Faint but firm. Do you need something? Water. 2 squeezes. They went through a list of possibilities. After several frustrating minutes, Maria had an idea. "Is it about a person? Do you want to see someone?" 1 powerful squeeze. The effort sent a jolt through her arm. "Your husband," Dr. Rossi asked. A violent, unmistakable series of 2 squeezes. "No, no, no." Dr. Rossi and Maria exchanged a look. "Someone else, then," Maria said gently. "Can you spell the name?" She began to go through the alphabet, a slow, painstaking process. A B. When she got to B, Eleanor gave a strong squeeze. Then for E. Then N. It took nearly 20 agonizing minutes, but finally the name was spelled out. B-E-N. Ben. Dr. Rossi looked puzzled. "Is Ben a family member?" 2 squeezes. A friend. 1 squeeze. Eleanor then fluttered her eyelids again, a signal she had devised for urgent. She had to convey more. She needed a pen. She needed a word. Maria, seeming to understand the desperation, had a flash of inspiration. Doctor, maybe. Maybe we could try facilitated communication. I could hold her hand with a pen. It was an unconventional idea, but Dr. Rossi, intrigued by Eleanor's fierce determination, agreed. Maria gently placed a pen in Eleanor's limp hand, wrapping her own around it to support the weight. She held a notepad beneath it. "Okay, Eleanor," Maria said softly. "Guide my hand. Just tell me where to go." The pen felt alien, a clumsy extension of a will that was still disconnected from the body. But Eleanor focused, channeling the image of the word into her mind. It was the key, the trigger, the one word only Ben would understand. She guided Maria's hand in a series of shaky, almost illegible scrawls. The letters were misshapen, the lines wobbly, but after a few minutes, a word was there on the page. Fireproof. Dr. Rossi looked at the paper, then at Eleanor. Fireproof. Eleanor gave one final exhausted squeeze. "Yes. And you want us to call Ben?" Dr. Rossi confirmed. "Yes. We'll need a full name and number." That was the next hurdle. But Maria, ever resourceful, remembered seeing a list of emergency contacts in Eleanor's admission file. She retrieved it. "There are a few Bens here. Benjamin Scott, Benjamin Riley. Here, Benjamin Carter. Is that him?" The squeeze she gave in response was the strongest one yet. It was a declaration. The game had begun. Dr. Rossi made the call. Her voice professionally neutral as she explained that her patient, Mrs. Sterling, was showing signs of consciousness and was asking for him. Eleanor let her head fall back against the pillow, the exhaustion absolute. She had fired the first shot. The architect had sent the signal. Now it was up to her ally to bring the walls of the fortress crashing down on its arrogant king. Benjamin Carter was in the middle of a deposition when his personal cell phone rang. He normally ignored it during proceedings, but the caller ID was Chicago General Hospital. His heart clenched. He excused himself immediately, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He'd been calling the hospital twice a day for updates on Eleanor getting the same vague, grim report. He feared the worst. "This is Benjamin Carter." "Mr. Carter, this is Dr. Isabella Rossi from Chicago General. I'm calling about Eleanor Vance Sterling." "Is she—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "She's awake, Mr. Carter." "Well, partially. Her cognitive function appears to be returning, but she has very limited motor control. She asked for you." Relief washed over him, so intensely his knees felt weak. "She asked for me." "How?" "It's a long story, but she was very insistent. She also communicated a word. She wanted me to tell it to you. The word is fireproof." Benjamin froze. The air in the hallway outside the conference room suddenly felt thin. Fireproof. It was their code, a private joke from 2 decades ago that had morphed into a solemn promise. It was the word they'd used when he witnessed the Vance Legacy Trust documents. "This is my fireproof vest, Ben," she had told him, "just in case I ever get caught in the blaze." Her telling him that word now could only mean one thing: the fire was here. And Richard had started it. "I understand," Benjamin said, his voice now cold and clipped, the friendly lawyer replaced by a predator. "Thank you, Doctor. I'll be there this evening. Please do not mention my impending visit to her husband, Mr. Sterling. Is that understood?" "Perfectly." "Mr. Carter," Dr. Rossi replied, a hint of complicity in her tone. Benjamin hung up and walked back into the conference room. "My apologies, gentlemen," he announced, his voice leaving no room for argument. "A critical emergency has arisen. We'll have to reschedule." He was out the door before anyone could object. He didn't go to the hospital first. He went to his office. He unlocked the top drawer of his private filing cabinet, a place no one else had a key to, and retrieved a thick navy blue binder. The cover simply read, "Vance Legacy. Contingency." He then made a call to a private investigator he kept on retainer, a former police detective named Frank Miller. "Frank, it's Ben Carter. I have a job for you. Priority Alpha. I need discreet 24/7 surveillance on two individuals, Richard Sterling and a woman named Chloe Decker, an employee at his company. I want everything. Who they meet, where they go, and especially their interactions at Chicago General Hospital. I have a strong suspicion of a breach of fiduciary duty. Get me something credible, Frank, and get it yesterday." His next call was to David Chen, the Senior Vice President of Trusts and Estates at Northern Merchants Bank, the institution that held the vast Sterling fortune. He and Chen had a long-standing professional relationship. "David Benjamin Carter, I'm invoking a contingency clause on the ENR Sterling Holdings Trust account number, ending in 771. I will be in your office at 9:00 a.m. sharp tomorrow with the necessary documentation. I need you and your legal team present. No advance notice is to be given to either of the current trustees." There was a moment of surprised silence on the other end. "Ben, that's one of our biggest accounts. Invoking a clause like that without notifying the trustees, it's highly irregular." "The circumstances are highly irregular, David," Benjamin said, his tone steely. "The charter allows for it. Read clause 11 section B subsection 2. You'll find I'm well within my rights as the designated legal representative. 9:00 a.m. He hung up. That evening he visited the hospital. He found Eleanor just as the doctor had described. Her eyes were open, and they tracked him as he entered the room. The fierce intelligence in them was unmistakable. He sat by her bed and took her hand. "I got your message, Elle," he whispered. "Fireproof. The plan is in motion. I just need one thing from you. The evidence." Using the laborious yes or no squeezing system, she told him everything. She described the conversation between Richard and Chloe, quoting their cruelest words verbatim. She told him about their plans for the money, for her life, for the future they were stealing. Benjamin listened, his expression hardening into a mask of cold fury. This wasn't just a marital dispute. It was a conspiracy born of breathtaking cruelty. "Is there a witness?" he asked. "A nurse? A doctor?" She squeezed twice. "No." They were alone. "Damn it," he muttered. It was her word against his, and she was in no position to testify. But then he remembered Frank. His phone buzzed an hour later. It was Frank. "You're not going to believe this, Ben. Your boy Sterling and the blonde Decker. They're not exactly subtle. I followed them from the hospital to a restaurant downtown, sat 2 tables away, put my phone on the table recording audio. It's not great quality, but it's damning. He's toasting to the imminent closing of the Kensington deal and their new beginning. He talks about his wife's tragic decline and how he'll soon be unburdened. It's all here." Benjamin felt a grim satisfaction. It was enough. It was the credible supporting evidence the clause required. He asked Frank to have the time-stamped audio file emailed to him immediately, along with a sworn affidavit of how and when it was obtained. The next morning at precisely 8:55 a.m., Benjamin Carter, dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, walked into the hushed, marble-floored offices of Northern Merchants Bank. He was calm, his movements precise. He was a lion entering an arena ready for the kill. He was escorted to a large boardroom where David Chen and two of the bank's top lawyers were waiting, their faces a mixture of curiosity and anxiety. Stacks of documents related to the E&R Sterling Holdings Trust were piled on the polished mahogany table. "Good morning, gentlemen," Benjamin said, placing his leather briefcase on the table and clicking it open. He didn't sit. He preferred to stand to command the room. "Ben, this is highly unusual," the bank's lead counsel, a man named Harris, began. "Mr. Sterling is one of our most valued clients. Mr. Sterling's status is about to change," Benjamin replied coolly. He pulled out the navy blue binder. "This is the charter for a secondary dormant trust, the Vance Legacy Trust. As per the instructions filed with this bank 15 years ago, it is to be activated upon the triggering of Clause 11B2 of the primary trust." He then laid out his case with surgical precision. He presented Dr. Rossi's signed medical assessment of Eleanor's incapacitation, fulfilling the first condition of the clause. Then he presented Frank Miller's sworn affidavit. Finally, he took a small digital audio player from his briefcase and placed it on the table. "And this," he said, his voice dropping, "is Mr. Sterling, in his own words, from last night, discussing his plans to benefit financially from his wife's imminent death, a death he himself seems prepared to facilitate. This constitutes, I believe, a textbook breach of fundamental fiduciary and marital duty." He pressed play. Richard's smug, confident voice filled the silent boardroom. The lawyers listened, their expressions shifting from skepticism to shock, and finally to grim understanding. The recording ended with the sound of Richard and Chloe clinking champagne glasses. Benjamin pressed stop. The silence in the room was absolute. "The charter is clear," Benjamin stated, his voice like ice. "Upon presentation of this evidence, all assets liquid and fixed, all shares, all properties held by E&R Sterling Holdings are to be transferred immediately and irrevocably to the Vance Legacy Trust. Eleanor Vance is the sole trustee and beneficiary. Richard Sterling is to be removed from every account. His access is to be revoked. His name is to be struck. As of this moment, he has no legal claim to a single dollar held by this bank." David Chen looked at his lawyers. Harris, the lead counsel, read the clause in the trust document one more time, his finger tracing the words Eleanor had written so long ago. He looked up at Benjamin, then at his colleague, who gave a slow, deliberate nod. The language was ironclad. There were no loopholes. They were legally, unequivocally bound to act. Harris let out a long, slow breath. "Mr. Carter, you've made your case. We will execute the transfer. It will be completed within the hour." Benjamin nodded, a flicker of grim triumph in his eyes. He snapped his briefcase shut. "Thank you for your cooperation, gentlemen. I'll be waiting for confirmation." He walked out of the bank and into the bright morning sunlight. The pieces were in place. The trap was set. All that was left was for the wolf to walk into it. Richard Sterling woke up feeling like the master of the universe. The sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, glinting off the glass and steel of the city he felt he owned. Today was the day. The Kensington Tower deal, the largest of his career, was closing. At 11 a.m., he was scheduled to wire a final 9-figure earnest money deposit to the sellers. By noon, the deal would be done, and his legacy would be cemented. He showered, whistling a cheerful tune. He chose his most expensive suit, a custom-tailored Tom Ford, and a Swiss watch that cost more than most people's cars. He glanced at the framed photo of him and Eleanor on his bedside table, a relic from a happier time. A pang of something annoyance, not guilt, pricked at him. Her timing for this whole medical drama was incredibly inconvenient. Still, he mused it did simplify things. He sent a quick text to Chloe. "Today's the day, kitten. The future is ours. See you tonight to celebrate." He had a quick breakfast served by his housekeeper, and then sat down in his home office, a magnificent room with a panoramic view of Lake Michigan. He logged into his Northern Merchants Bank business portal, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He navigated to the wire transfer page, entered the staggering sum, the recipient's account details, and the authorization codes. He clicked Confirm. An error message appeared on the screen. Transaction declined, insufficient funds. Richard stared at it, baffled. Insufficient funds. That was impossible. The account held more than double the required amount. He tried again, thinking he'd made a typo. The same message appeared. Annoyance began to bubble in his chest. A technical glitch, no doubt. The bank's website was probably down for maintenance. He hated dealing with these little technological hiccups. It was beneath him. He picked up his phone and dialed his private banker, a man named Henderson he'd had on speed dial for years. "Richard, good morning, calling about the big day." Henderson's voice was obsequiously cheerful. "Henderson, your system is on the fritz," Richard snapped, his patience already wearing thin. "I'm trying to wire the Kensington deposit, and it's kicking it back. Says insufficient funds. Fix it. Now." There was a pause on the other end, followed by the soft clicking of a keyboard. The silence stretched on for an uncomfortably long time. Richard?" Henderson's voice had lost its confident edge. It was now hesitant, nervous. I'm seeing something very unusual on my end. Your access to the ENR Holdings accounts appears to be restricted." "Restricted?" Richard barked out a laugh. "What are you talking about? I am ENR Holdings. It's my company, my money, unrestricted." "I can't, sir," Henderson stammered. "The directive came from the top, from our legal and trust division. As of 9:01 this morning, your signatory authority was revoked. The assets have been consolidated into a new trust." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Richard felt a cold dread creep up his spine, a feeling he hadn't experienced since he was a young man on the verge of his first bankruptcy. "That's absurd. It's a mistake. Put me through to your legal department. Put me through to David Chen. Mr. Chen is in a meeting, sir. He left explicit instructions not to be disturbed. Sir, according to this, the new controlling entity is something called the Vance Legacy Trust. The sole trustee is Eleanor Vance Sterling." The name hit him like a physical blow. Eleanor. It was impossible. She was a vegetable, a shell. She couldn't sign her own name, let alone execute a complex financial coup. This had to be some colossal, insane misunderstanding. "Listen to me very carefully, Henderson." Richard said, his voice a low, menacing growl. "My wife is in a coma. She is medically incapacitated. I have power of attorney. Whatever paperwork you think you have is fraudulent. You are going to reverse this right now, or the first call I make will be to my lawyer to sue you, this bank, and every person involved into oblivion. Are we clear?" Mr. Sterling, the documentation we received was accompanied by a medical directive certifying Mrs. Sterling's condition, but it also invoked Clause 11B of your trust's charter. It was presented by her legal counsel, Benjamin Carter. It's all in order, sir. My hands are tied. I'm sorry. Benjamin Carter. The name ignited a firestorm of fury in Richard's mind. Eleanor's sanctimonious lawyer friend. This was his doing. He must have somehow forged her signature, cooked up this scheme to steal his money. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. The Kensington deal. The deposit was due in less than 2 hours. If he missed that wire, he would be in breach of contract. He'd lose the deal, forfeit the millions he'd already put down, and his reputation would be in tatters. His lenders, his partners, they would descend on him like sharks. He hung up on Henderson and immediately tried to use his corporate credit card to book a helicopter to fly him downtown. Declined. He tried another card. Declined. He pulled up his personal checking account, his walking around money. The balance was 0. She'd taken everything. Not just the business assets. Everything. The penthouse, the cars, the personal accounts. It had all been funneled through the master trust. He was locked out of his own life. He stormed through the penthouse, a gilded cage that was no longer his. He saw the art on the walls. Eleanor had chosen the furniture she had picked out. It all seemed to be mocking him. He was a king who had woken up to find his castle was made of cardboard and his crown was made of tin. He grabbed his car keys and sprinted to the garage, his mind racing. He had to get to the bank. He had to get to the hospital. He had to confront Carter and that bitch Eleanor. He would scream. He would threaten. He would force them to undo this. He jumped into his Bentley, a car he now realized he probably didn't even own anymore, and tore out of the garage, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He ran a red light, earning a blast from a taxi's horn. He didn't care. The carefully constructed facade of Richard Sterling, titan of industry, was crumbling around him, and all he could feel was a desperate, primal rage. He had made one fatal mistake. He had underestimated his wife. He had seen a quiet, supportive partner and had been blind to the brilliant, ruthless lawyer who had always been lurking just beneath the surface. He had thought he was the predator. He was just now realizing he had been the prey all along. When Richard burst into the ICU, he was a storm of fury and entitlement. His expensive suit was rumpled, his face was flushed, and his eyes were wild. He bypassed the nurse's station, ignoring their calls for him to stop, and slammed open the door to Eleanor's room. "What the hell have you done?" he roared, the sound utterly out of place in the hushed, sterile environment. But the scene that met him was not what he expected. The room was no longer just a sterile medical space. It was a command center. Benjamin Carter, looking impossibly calm, in a crisp suit, stood by the window. Dr. Rossi was present, holding a clipboard and looking on with a stern, protective expression. And in the bed, propped up by a wedge of pillows, was Eleanor. She was not the comatose victim he had last seen. Her eyes were open, clear and sharp as chips of ice. An IV was still taped to her arm, and her movements were slight, but the force of her presence filled the room. The fragile, broken woman was gone. In her place sat a queen on her chessboard, looking at a cornered king. "Richard," she said. Her voice was weak, raspy, from disuse, but it cut through his rage like a scalpel. "You're making a scene. You should lower your voice." He stared at her, momentarily stunned into silence by her lucidity. He turned his fury on Benjamin. "This is your doing, Carter. You cooked up this scheme, you forged her name. There were no forgeries. Richard, Benjamin said, his voice dangerously quiet. Everything was executed according to the letter of the law. A law that you incidentally signed off on. You should really read your contracts more carefully. Richard turned back to Eleanor, his face contorting with disbelief and rage. You can't do this. That money is mine. I built that company. Did you? Eleanor asked, her voice gaining a little more strength. I seem to recall structuring the loans. I recall negotiating with the zoning boards. I recall writing the contracts that made your vision a reality. You were the face, Richard. I was the foundation, and you were careless enough to build your entire house on a foundation you didn't understand. She took a slow, deliberate sip of water from a cup a nurse held for her. I heard you, you know. I heard everything. You and Chloe. Richard's face went pale. I heard you calling me a vegetable. She continued, her voice devoid of emotion. I heard you discussing my quality of life and how you'd have to make the hard choice to let me go. I heard you kissing her right there in that chair you're about to lean on. I heard you planning your trip to Monaco with my money. Each word was a perfectly aimed shot. Richard staggered back as if he'd been physically struck. He looked around the room at the doctor, at the nurse, at Benjamin. He saw no sympathy, only cold, hard judgment. He was exposed, his vile hypocrisy laid bare. You were awake, he stammered. My mind was, and it was working perfectly. It was remembering a rainy Tuesday, 15 years ago, and a very specific clause I wrote to protect myself from a man I hoped you would never become. A clause for a breach of fundamental fiduciary and marital duty. It's a beautifully vague phrase, don't you think? It gives a lot of latitude. Your little bedside chat with Chloe more than met the criteria. Just then the door opened again. A pale, trembling Chloe Decker stood there, trailed by a grim-faced man in a suit whom Richard recognized as the head of his company's HR department. Richard Chloe's voice was a panicked squeak. My corporate cards were all declined. They told me my employment was terminated. The man here gave me this box. She was holding a small cardboard box with a few personal items from her desk. She looked from Richard's ashen face to the woman sitting up in the hospital bed. The power dynamic in the room was palpable and terrifying. She had hitched her wagon to a falling star, and it was dragging her down into the abyss with it. "Get out," Eleanor said, her gaze fixed on Chloe. The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of an executioner's sentence. Chloe flinched, turned, and practically fled from the room. Richard's rage finally gave way to a desperate, pathetic plea. "Eleanor, please," he begged, taking a step towards the bed. "The Kensington deal, my entire career is on the line, everything I've worked for. You can't just take it all away. We built it together. We built it," she acknowledged, a flicker of the old pain in her eyes. "And you tried to steal it. You stood over my comatose body and plotted my death so you could run away with your 20-something mistress. The together part of our story ended then, Richard. As for the Kensington deal, it's no longer your concern. The Vance Legacy Trust now holds the controlling interest in Sterling Properties. I've already been on the phone with the other partners." They were surprisingly understanding when Benjamin explained the situation. "The wire transfer for the deposit was made an hour ago, from my account. The finality of it crushed him. She hadn't just taken his money. She had taken his legacy. She had stepped seamlessly into his place, erasing him from his own life's work, with a few phone calls and the stroke of a pen. So what now? He whispered, the fight draining out of him, leaving a hollow shell. What happens to me? Eleanor looked at him, and for the first time he saw not just anger, but a profound, weary pity. I imagine your lenders will be calling soon. Your investors. You personally guaranteed many of those loans, didn't you? Always so confident. Without the assets of sterling properties to back you, you are insolvent. You have nothing. The penthouse is owned by the trust. The cars, the accounts, everything. You have the clothes on your back, and a watch that you should probably sell. I've instructed my lawyer to file for divorce on the grounds of adultery, and let's get creative attempted conspiracy to misappropriate assets. You'll be lucky to avoid criminal charges. Benjamin Carter stepped forward, holding out a plain white envelope. This is a restraining order, Richard. It forbids you from coming within 500 feet of Eleanor. You are to have no contact. If you violate it, you will be arrested. A security detail is waiting outside to escort you from the premises. Richard looked from the envelope to his wife's face one last time, searching for any sign of the woman he married. He found none. He had killed her, in a way, and in her place a stronger, more formidable woman had been born from his betrayal. Defeated, he turned and walked out of the room, a king dethroned. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving a profound silence in its wake, broken only by the steady, calm beep of the heart monitor. It was the sound of a life no longer in limbo, but firmly, resolutely in control. The months that followed were a quiet revolution. Eleanor's physical recovery was arduous, but steady, driven by the same iron will she'd used to reclaim her life. The day she walked out of the hospital, leaning only slightly on a cane, she felt the Chicago wind on her face and knew she was free. She immediately took the helm of what was once Sterling Properties, and her first act was to have the name taken down. In its place, a new sign was raised, Vance Enterprises. Richard Sterling's downfall was as swift as it was spectacular. Stripped of his financial empire, his creditors descended, forcing him into a humiliating bankruptcy. He became a cautionary tale, a ghost in the city he once sought to conquer. Chloe Decker, a pawn in a game between a king and a queen, vanished into obscurity. Her ambitions turned to ash. Eleanor, however, took no joy in their demise. Her focus was not on revenge, but on reconstruction. She wasn't interested in simply building more towers. Instead, she established the Vance Foundation, funded by her company's profits, with a clear mission to provide legal and financial support for women victimized by marital fraud and financial abuse. Her story, once a private horror, became a public inspiration. She had been buried by betrayal and had clawed her way out, not just to survive, but to build something better from the wreckage. About a year later, she stood on the observation deck of the Kensington Tower, the very project at the center of the turmoil. Benjamin Carter stood beside her, looking out at the sprawling city. "Quite a view," he said softly. Richard always wanted his name on the skyline, and in a way, it is. Eleanor replied, a peaceful smile touching her lips. "This building will stand for a century, funding a foundation that will help thousands. It's a sterling legacy, just not the one he envisioned." The beep of the heart monitor was a distant echo replaced by the steady rhythm of her own resilient heart. She had taken a name tarnished by greed and redefined it, making it sterling again, but this time entirely on her own terms. The story of Eleanor Vance is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals can often forge the strongest resolve. It's a testament to the fact that strength isn't about never falling. It's about how you rise. She turned her darkest moment into her defining one, using the very tools of her oppression to architect her liberation. Her foresight and intelligence were her armor and her sword. This wasn't just a story of revenge. It was a story of reclamation of her name, her power, and her future. If this story of justice and resilience resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Stories like these are important, and sharing them helps us all. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next real-life drama. What part of Eleanor's story stood out to you the most? Let us know in the comments below.